Let's talk about why painters hate slap chop. Welcome to Tattoo Tabletop. My name is James, and today we are discussing slap chop and why I think some painters hate it. Now, obviously, I'm not trying to use this as a blanket statement to say that everybody hates slap chop. That's just not true. There's actually a lot of top artists that actually utilize slap chop, like, from what I hear, Richard Gray. Those are Golden Demon Award-winning artists that actually utilize the slap chop method. Now, what I am saying is over the past couple months, I've actually run into a few situations where the fact of the matter is, I've heard comments where people mention while paint judging things like, oh, that looks slap chop like, or that just looks like it's slap chopped together and that's it. Like, they've been utilizing it as a means of a critique that I don't think is an honest or fair critique of that miniature. So for example, obviously, as you know, I've utilized slap chop quite a bit in a lot of my videos. One of the reasons is because I utilize speed painting. Obviously, speed painting is meant to paint speedily. You're meant to finish the miniature, get it to a really good looking standard, and get it on the tabletop. Speed painting is really good for what I would consider the miniature war gamer. The one who's there to play the game. They want to put the models on the table, get the tape measure, roll the dice, and they're there to play the game. Now, that means that on a very real level, on some elements, that you're not really working with certain elements, like you're not submitting these to like paint competitions, but you can. At the end of the day, you can. And this is actually part of what has triggered my thought process regarding that. So I submitted some pieces that had utilized some slap chop methods. Now, usually a lot of times I like to utilize slap chop and then some. You have a lot of content creators like Ninja and stuff like that are like slap chop 2.0, or this is better than slap chop, or slap chop bang bang. I don't know what that was, I'm sorry. But now with these painting competitions that offered up a different lens of things. Realistically, I've gone to some painting competitions and I've heard some critiques that are talking about, how, you need to do slap chop, but if you do slap chop, you need to go above and beyond slap chop, which is fair. I agree with that on its intrinsic level. However, there are some things that you can tell didn't use slap chop, did the traditional methods, and looked worse than those that did slap chop and then looked better, but the thing that was realistically had more time spent on it seemed to score higher than the thing that didn't. And I don't really think that that really computes. I don't think that that's right, realistically. But that's just my opinion. My slap chop that I do is extremely basic. I just take a pure white, dry brush it over the black. Usually I don't even bother with the gray, personally. I would argue that my videos are probably closer relegated towards the war gamer. The person who's there to take their miniatures and put them on the tabletop and just get playing. But I think my method can also be applied to other people who are like miniature painting and trying to kind of up their level a little bit. I think there's a lot that slap chop offers that can really kind of upscale your ability and still contribute a little bit more to it. Now, obviously, I've used the slap chop on the Seraphon Sars Warriors video. I've also utilized it on the Drakari video. It yields a result that I think speaks for itself, where you can create this sort of higher level of miniature without expending too much effort and time. Because here's where it really comes down to it. You're coming down to two options. You're either painting for speed or you're painting for competition. Those two separate things are gonna really dictate where you go with your slap chop and what you do with it. If you're there to game and you're trying to get your stuff done, let's say you have 40 zombies that you're painting for Soul-like Gravelords, or even just like 20 Space Marines. Although I'd argue Space Marines it doesn't work nearly as well with because there's not as much texture, it's a round shoulder. You're there to get your models done. You need to get them set for a tournament, they need to follow the rules, so you're gonna do the slap chop all over the model, you're gonna block it in with contrast or washes, and then you're gonna pick out some details with some acrylics, some metallics, done. You're there to game, you're there to be done, you're done. Then you're gonna go onto the painting side. I still think slap chop has an absolute place in the painting competition side of things. Now granted, like I said earlier, I do think you need to take a step above slap chop, where you start with the slap chop basis and then you add another layer of acrylic. Maybe it's like in the case of like my Star Wars Warriors video, you cover the chest piece, but then you pick out the individual muscles on the chest and the stomach of the Star Wars warrior. That's an acrylic, that's an extra step, or dry brushing the scales. Realistically, the scales are good when you just cover it with the contrast after the slap chop, but the dry brush does bring it up to that bluish hue a little bit more, kind of helps blend things in and gives it a little bit better texture, even if it's just a light dry brush. So why do I feel like higher end painters really don't care for the slap chop method? It's just been some things that I've noticed again. I've gone to tournaments where there's been some paint judging of some kind, or I've gone to painting competitions where that's the reference point. They mention that something was slap chopped and doesn't look like there's been more done to it. But usually that's just not true. So why do high-end painters hate slap chop? Again, I don't think it's everybody, but there seems to be a sort of contentment when it comes to talking about slap chop. There's this kind of, I don't know if it's just like the painters that, that paint for display models or stuff like that, if they just kind of have this sort of resentment towards it. And there are some that may seem like they have resentment towards it, but don't. Now, I'm not making a complete general assumption that all high-end painters like Vince Venturella or Miniac or Ninjon dislike slap chop. I know that they've used slap chop in certain methods, but sometimes when it comes to other creators or even just other painters, sometimes you hear slap chop spoken with a kind of tone of contentment. And I think some of it may stem from the fact that it's a relatively low time yield, high reward kind of system where you can really realistically achieve something really cool in a very, very short period of time. I don't know if that necessarily breeds contentment, but when I go to a paint tournament and I see that someone painted something the traditional method and scored higher than something that did slap chop, but the slap chop model just genuinely looks better, the transitions look more interesting, the model has more going on with it, it kind of breeds a bit of a problem. Because at that point, what you're really rewarding is time spent versus the actual reward yield. Best thing I can kind of think of is, let's say someone's out in the desert and they're digging and they keep digging for a week and eventually they find water. Cool. They got water, they're good. Then someone just kind of rocks up in the desert, looks around a little bit, puts their shovel on the ground, and they instantly spring water. You don't just reward the person. Now that's a really bad example because water's an essential. We're just going to keep going anyway. You're not just going to reward the person who spent a week digging in all the wrong places versus the person who actually just struck water. You're going to pick the person who should, or realistically, you should pick the person who found the water in the first go. They found the gold, they found whatever precious resource. To each their own metaphor. But long story short, I don't feel like slap chop should be treated with such a sort of discerning nature. There's a lot of people that, again, always talk about, well, I'm fine with slap chop, but you gotta do something above slap chop. And I agree. However, there are some models that have genuinely looked better when they were just slap chopped versus when someone decided to kind of take this next step, or someone who just did pure acrylics, wash, acrylic, highlight, the whole 9 yards. And I think it just sets a wrong precedent, in my opinion. That's good. So the reason I bring it up is because when I was down in Tampa, I was really hoping that my army would make the paint parade by I'm Not Deepkin, which you have seen in the previous videos. Look in the thing to find the videos with the stuff, okay? You got it. So basically, I had really hoped that my army would make the paint parade, so that way I'd get a paint score, add it to my gaming score, and hopefully, fingers crossed, go for best overall. Well, I didn't make the paint parade, and there were a lot of really incredible models that were in the paint parade. There were some that I'll admit to disagreeing with a little bit, where some of them I just don't think either had enough color or didn't really have anything unique enough for them to go forward, but that's a whole nother thing. So I didn't make the paint parade, but I did want to get feedback from the GW employees, or at least one of them, to kind of find out what could I do to improve my painting or to, try and get into the paint parade later. And I had asked him, and specifically, obviously, from, if you remember my bases from before, I had my Met Deepkin storming the beaches, there was water crashing up off the rocks, and all those kind of little water details, and I did a light dry brush or a light sponging of the crests on the waves, so it looked like the bubbles from waves crashing and stuff like that. And I put my time into it. Nothing absurd, but I did what I could to try and make them seem kind of convincing. And when it came back to me, he gave me a few tips on, things that I was definitely aware of. Like, oh, well, on this cape, there's, some pooling right here. I'm like, yep, 100%. That is a mistake on my end. But one bit that he brought up that also kind of irked me a little bit was he mentioned, well, Idneth, coming out of the water, or the water Idneth theme has been done to bits. Yeah, obviously. And it's because the Idneth Deepkin come from the ocean. That's where they live, and they raid the land for souls. Like, where do you want me to put my eels? In space? That is actually a good idea. Space eels. That's next. I'll do a whole nother Idneth Deepkin army. Idneth in space. Idneth Space Kitten. There we go. But seriously, what ended up happening is getting that feedback kind of didn't necessarily defeat me, but it definitely made me kind of wonder, well, that doesn't seem right. And that kind of harkens back to that argument about Slapchop that I had received before, where there's people just saying, oh, well, it just looks Slapchop, so minus 10 points. And that's not what it should be. And granted, Slapchop is a tool in the tool chest. It shouldn't be your only tool that you use to build your army. There's other elements that should go into it. But I feel like that there's still a heavy discount on the Slapchop method, and I just feel like there really shouldn't be. But what do I know? Like I said, I am not a top Golden Demon winning, barely won any painting award of any sort of kind. But I do want to provide, tips and stuff like that. And I do have people who come to me and ask me questions about how I paint my Space Marines, how I paint my Age of Sigmar armies, or what paints I like to use and stuff like that. And it's really cool, and I really appreciate it. And at the end of the day, I just want to be helpful for other people, whether that's Slapchop, whether that's dry brushing, whether that's traditional acrylic, wash, etc. There's all sorts of different painting methods out there, and there's all sorts of different styles that you can always try. So well, and that just about wraps it up for me. But hey, let me know what you think about Slapchop in the comments below. Do you like it? Do you use it? Do you also kind of dislike it? Or just whatever, just down there. Just throw things down there. Otherwise, if you like this video, like and subscribe. If you like this kind of content, I do plan on doing a lot more. I'm still working on a few things. Obviously, we're going into the holiday season, so there's going to be a bit of a break here like there was before. Obviously, Christmas and stuff coming up, but I'm going to try and work on some more content. I'm going to work on live streaming for 2024, try and get that all set up so that you guys can see what I work on a regular basis, try and get a few more videos out. I do also want to maybe indulge a little bit the idea of a podcasty kind of vibe. There's some microphones right here that we might utilize as well to maybe create some other content there as well. Might even do some reactions to some content as well. But hey, who knows? But until then, I've been Tattoo Tabletop. Go paint something.